Hello everybody, and welcome back to Writing the Rapids, the show where I, Joe Bielecki, talk to writers about writing. Very often those writers have been recommended to me by writers who have previously been on the show. In the case of this month's guest, Christopher Zeischegg, he was recommended to me by O.F. Sierra, so if you like this episode, go back and listen to that one, and if you liked that one, well, stick around. Christopher Zeischegg is a writer and filmmaker who spent 8 years working in the adult film industry as performer Danny Wilde. He is the author of Creation on Art and Becoming, The Magician, Body to Job, The Wolves That Live in Skin and Space, and Come to My Brother. He lives in Los Angeles. Before we get into the show, let's talk about how you can support the show for $2 a month, patreon.com/noisemakerjoe. You can get these episodes about a day earlier than everybody else. You can also buy my novel. It's called Tired. It's on Amazon, or tell a friend about it, post about it on social media, or even something as simple as listening to the podcast all the way through. Now, without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Christopher. I started out reading some of the Goodreads reviews. I don't know why I've gotten into doing this with Indie Lit, but I have started just like flipping through reviews, I guess mostly because they tend to be quite positive. And in that manner, I can like prep myself for certain things I may miss on a reading. For as much reading as I do, I feel sort of like poorly read and ill-equipped. So reading positive Goodreads reviews by people who are like intimate with the author, or at least like this world in a way that maybe I feel like I'm not, it's super useful. So one of them was talking about like, man, I wish I had read some of his other books first, because there's references to them. But I don't necessarily feel that way. Like I feel like this is a good first book of yours, and maybe that's a benefit of like autofiction, and like I don't know, at this point it's like meta autofiction,
right?
You can just kind of start wherever, and then whatever context you want you can expand out, As a person who's only really seen, you came on my radar as a writer with The Magician. I saw a whole bunch of people talking about it positively, and I said to myself, yeah, I should pick that up. I need to pick it up. I ended up buying some books from Amphetamine Sulfate, and I think like The Magician was just not available at that point in time or something. But I haven't read it yet.
That's fine. It's coming out again later this
year. It is. I'm very excited about that. But I do find that this was a good entry point. And I wonder if all of that is something that you kept in mind while assembling the book.
No, I've mentioned this a couple of times now in some other interviews, but like the original sort of pitch to Apocalypse Party with Creation was not as cohesive as it is now. I really felt like I was trying to bide my time between The Magician and finishing up another novel that is more or less in the can right now, but I'm not really going to talk about that. Anyway, I was just like, I have written a bunch of short stories over the past decade. I looked back at least a handful of them and saw a kind of theme that ran through them that was loosely tied to these ideas of art and violence, which I guess are things that sort of interest me in general. But that there wasn't like much of a through line other than that. And Ben had reached out to me maybe a year or two after The Magician came out and wanted to know if I wanted to publish with him. And I felt at that time still very loyal to Philip Best, who runs Amphetamine Sulfate. And I still actually, it's not like he and I have had any falling out. I actually got his blessing to to take the magician and go elsewhere. But really what it came down to is after that, once Ben said yes, I was trying to make this something that I would be a little bit more interested in working on for 6 months to a year to kind of put something together. And there were a couple of things that happened during that time. The first was I wanted to get out of this kind of cycle I was writing within, which I mentioned at the beginning of the book, and it kind of comes together at the end. And the middle of it doesn't stray very far from my typical bullshit, which is like autofiction, predominantly focused on kind of my identity, my past identity as a sex worker, which was mostly in my 20s and a little bit in my early 30s. I did adult films. I was a cam boy. I did a little bit of hustling, especially at the end of my porn career. And, I think initially there was like an affectation tied to that in terms of my writing, because I also had this interest in like horror films or underground metal or other things that use like violence as a language to talk about a lot of things in our lives, whether that's sort of like our emotional self or whatever. And even in terms of literature, a lot of the things that excited me as a teenager and young adult were like Bret Easton Ellis novels, Dennis Cooper, things that were labeled transgressive at that time. And yet that stuff was no longer really speaking to me, and in terms of like, oh, this is really exciting, because I felt like I'd already kind of discovered the end of that, at least the end of it in terms of what I'm willing to go. Like I've mentioned this also, like I used to be really excited by like Peter Sodos's work, and I still think he's kind of an amazing and singular writer, but the subject matter is such that I'm not really interested in like sitting with that in my day-to-day life, like pedophilia, rape, things like that. Like I don't have any moral qualms against that in fiction, but it's just kind of not my vibe at the moment. So even though I guess a lot of my writing touches on similar themes, all that's to say, I went back and spoke to a good friend of mine. Her name is Luca Fisher, and she became a prominent figure in this book, this short story collection, because she and I began our relationship probably like a year or two before I quit my adult industry career. And during that time, and especially shortly thereafter, both of our lives were in this really chaotic thing. I was like losing my career, had a lot of financial difficulties, was in the midst of this kind of insane relationship. I think unbeknownst to me at the beginning, Luca was going through like a lot of like issues around gender dysphoria. I met her as a man, and she transitioned about halfway through our relationship, but she was a strange person who was like very interested in art, and yet the type of art she did was really elusive to me. I mean, you could say things like she did paintings and photography, but she also thought of herself kind of as like a producer of underground art. And I never really met someone who had that interest. Like she wanted to produce films and records and things like this, but with people who had no resources. And yet she was like very interested in kind of like mid-century like Hollywood film and producers like in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s who had, I don't know, these insane ideas and were able to pull off really insane like publicity stunts. But there was kind of some money backing that. So sometimes it felt like, well, how the fuck are we going to do things like that? But I would get little bits of money from like fucking an older man, and we'd like go for it and try to do something crazy, or she would just come up with some resources. And I don't really know how all of that came together, but this was scrappy fucking stuff. Like, but I think it helped develop my identity as an artist or something like that, even though I feel like that's still kind of weird to say. But I felt like I owed her a lot, and I wanted to include like an old essay I'd written about her that just hadn't gotten any traction really, and then finalize the book by having a conversation with her about where we were at in our contemporary lives. And this happened last summer. And it was just like a very sincere thing where we talked. I was trying to talk mostly about what she was up to, but it kind of came full circle back to me, as my writing often does. And yeah, I think that became something that just felt really important to me at the time, and made this much more of a cohesive book rather than just like, oh, I'm just going to shit out a bunch of short stories into the world just as a placeholder, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found those three pieces to be maybe my favorite of the book. I think the most important part, like as a work of fiction, is really fantastic.
Thank you.
But I guess where I am in my life is kind of more in that like tender spot of like, I want to see that there are people doing things like what Luca was doing, and like feel like those people are real and near, and like I could meet someone like that. And so like those sections were really great to read, because it's like, okay, yes, like there's a type of friendship out there that I can like see as something that exists and works, and that like feels really good. And to kind of punctuate the rest of the book with that was like really cool.
Well, I appreciate that feedback. That's lovely to hear. And yeah, I don't know. I like to pass these things on to Luca, because I think there's a little bit of just an intention to sort of honor her with this book.
Yeah, it felt that way. And it reminds me of, there's a song by the rapper Milo called "Song About a Ray Gun," which is about the rapper Bus Driver. And it's the sort of mythology is that Milo was really put on by Bus Driver and the people around him, and really appreciated that, because he also really genuinely liked their work and wrote this song about Bus Driver and like how good of a rapper he is and how much he inspires him. And it was a really like, the song probably came out when I was in my early 20s, and so like to be like, oh, you can have a friendship where you talk about your friends in public like this, like I love this person platonically because I respect them and they're good to me, was like, oh, whoa, cool, yeah. And so seeing that now, almost, seeing creation now, like almost a decade later, it's one of those things where it's just like, yeah, like we can have friendships like this. Fuck yeah.
Awesome. I'm completely unfamiliar with the two rap artists that you just mentioned, but hopefully that's okay. I understand the.
Yeah, I think you're probably in the majority. This is like a very underground hip hop sort of thing. Anybody who does get this listening, hit me up. we can be friends, because but sort of one of the things I was thinking about wanting to talk to you about was just like the idea of friendship, because I feel like I see a lot in our sphere, and I think probably this extends into many different artistic fields, and then probably also into civilian life, of like it's kind of easy to become friends with an artist, but it can be really difficult to know just how good of friends you are with them, and like, is this person friends with me because they liked my book, or because they know a lot of other people like my book, or they know the right people like my book? that sort of thing. So like, you know, similarly as an artist who has friends, like, you know, where are you at with that like idea?
Well, I think some of what you're hinting at least what I'm taking you to mean, is like, you know, when we interact with people online, especially like on social media, and especially around things where we're like usually trying to promote our stuff, and hopefully in like also trying to investigate what other people are doing, and with a genuine curiosity, and maybe, you know, hype their stuff as well. You know, I think we can fall, or at least I notice myself, or just my interactions with people, falling into this very like, well, you know, I'd love to send you a book, or someone does the thing vice versa. And you know, that's nice. And I think that it actually does, there's a genuine desire on my part to want to keep up with what people are doing. And I've had to close off myself a little bit, because like you mentioned before we got on the air, there's just so much stuff coming out in contemporary fiction, and whatever sphere you work in as an artist, and especially if you overlap, say you also are interested in music or film or something, I mean, there's only so much bandwidth you have, right? But I think like some of these more long lasting, genuine friendships that I've developed, you know, it's sort of, you can't really like force this or think of it as like the same as like a business relationship, because these usually just happen organically. I think with Luca, this was a specific thing where I got to give her the credit, because I think I was a little bit taken aback by her at first. We met on an adult film set, but she was like an extra, and it had a lot to do with, I think, her curiosity about the world, that she kept sort of putting herself into my life. But it was, I I still can't really speak for her, but she kept showing up to events that I was a part of that were not, that had nothing to do with porn or anything. It was like, I was in a metal band at the time, and she wanted to introduce me to all these people that she thought were interesting artists, or who might collaborate with me. And not like I worked with all of them, but initially I was just like, fuck off. Like, who are you? Like, why are you here all the time? Because she was not the type of person you would see at a typical show like that. Like, I was used to just like black-haired Hessians and the battle vests and whatever. And Luca was trying to like dress like Andy Warhol or something. And yeah, so, you know, I can also look back on a few, sorry, my wife just got home. You can keep that edit if you want.
Got it.
If I think about like friendships with other writers, for example, I think there's a lot of like right place, right time. Like, I have not like a really close relationship with like Chelsea Hodson, but we have maintained sort of this closeness despite our distance, our physical distance. But I think it's really because we connected around the time that at least I felt or similar in our path. Like, we both had a book come out. I came to visit her, and then we got like, I came out to one of her readings, and then we just got put on like a panel together in New York, and got to spend like a couple of days together. And it was just something that, you know, I didn't plan that, she didn't plan that, but it allowed us to kind of develop some sort of I don't know, close. I wouldn't say like severe closeness, but, you know, we kept in touch over the years. Now it's like, you know, that's 6 years ago, and we still try and just like help each other out. And you know, I think she's ahead of me in the game, kind of. I look up to her quite a bit, but I don't know. She's been a sweetheart to me, and yeah. So I don't know how to really define how you go about doing that. I mean, I mentioned in the book, most of my adult friendships just come about organically, mostly via people I work with. Because that's so much of adult life, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I remember seeing a reel or something on Instagram where some guy was like, the best way to make friends is just to go to the same place regularly, and it will eventually happen. And like, I don't know if Twitter counts as a place, but I have also met friends over the internet who are also writers, and it seems like the friendships that have blossomed the most have been friendships where we just happen to be writers, but it's not like we didn't meet for each other's stuff, right? It's just like we're in the same situation, and that's how it grows. And which, I don't know, like, it all seems difficult. Like making friends as an adult seems difficult. Like, I don't know how people did it back in the day, because like my wife will take my kid to the park while I'm at work, and people our parents' age are like, well, how many friends have you met, Katie, at the park? And she's like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm just, like, it's not the same people there every day. Like, that must have been a thing for Gen Xers, that like, their parents saw the same people at the park every day. But like, it doesn't seem like that's even the case anymore. And yeah, I don't know, like, there's the theme of friendship, I guess, is on my mind as my aesthetic interests lead more toward the tender, where it's just like, how can I be in a room with 5 people and nobody's talking and nobody feels bad? Like, that sounds fucking sick to me right now. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I don't really have any concrete advice.
That's fine. I think that's all anybody's got. I also want to touch on transgression a little bit, because it's a term that I've kind of bristled at for the past couple of years, maybe, and there's a couple different reasons. Like, I recently read Poppy Z. Bright's Exquisite Corpse, and it's a fantastic book. And like, kind of like you, I don't really have any problems with anybody depicting anything one way or the other, especially, I think it's actually pretty easy to tell if someone's like a secret Nazi who's like really getting off on some of the terrible things that they're writing about. If you actually read their writing, when all you see are their tweets, it's like, this person gives me bad vibes. But sure, when it's, if you sit down to actually read an entire novel, like, there is a difference between American Psycho and the Turner Diaries. And, like, transgression, I guess, kind of like the avant-garde. I'm getting deja vu. Maybe I've said this before. Like, it feels like it's something that needs to continually be being redefined. Because there's only so many books about dead kids that I can read before it's no longer shocking to read a book about dead kids. And
yeah, well, I'll
sure. Yeah. I was going to throw it to you. I'm wondering if maybe that's kind of where you've come to on it, or if there's another kind of different reason why you're feeling less enchanted by it.
No, I've actually had this conversation in a variety of ways, like a lot the past several months. And I think it's something in the air right now, because a lot of people, I'm going to guess you're within, I don't know, 5 to 10 years of my age. I don't know exactly, but
I'm 31.
Oh shit. Well, you're much younger than me. Great. Good for you. I'm 38, but it's still 10 years. So I was, anyway, in terms of like people of my generation, and I don't know if you are on the cusp or you're Gen Z or what you consider yourself at this age.
I feel on the cusp, but kind of squarely millennial.
Got it. Well, it's like, I can only speak for myself and the people who I feel are like really in my generation, especially those who are interested in what I was interested growing up. It's like, I think there's a natural inclination for young people to kind of go against whatever was taught to them. Or, I mean, that transgressive idea, I think, especially in 1990s United States, when like, Christianity has having this massive mainstream moment. It's sort of like a lot of what we saw in the world, even in my early teenage years with like the Bush administration and all of this stuff. It seemed like there was this conservative trend to like censor things. And so I think there was a lot of artistic movements that were just trying to peel back the lid on almost anything just for the sake of it. And, that's not really anything new now that I have a little bit more of a historical context. But at least for me at that time, it was really exciting to see explicit violence or pre like Pornhub, to have all this access to like people who are thinking about like really pervy shit or whatever. But we are kind of in a different environment where it's like now you open up your fucking internet and you can get access to like to the worst shit in the world immediately, and the most explicit thing, and that's sort of, and it's all just become a kind of like bleeding numbness for me. And while I think there are certain aesthetics that I'll just be into, whether that's for nostalgia's sake or just because I like that and I don't have any reason other than that. Like I like something that has a little bit of a mean tinge to it. Like I like writers who have a kind of mean voice, but I like them to be kind of a sweetheart in real life. But you know what I mean? There's something just provocative about that. And I don't think I'm going to lose that, but it's, I'm also, like you said, extreme sex, extreme violence, sort of edgelord behavior does not feel like it's transgressing anything. I mean, we just have constant 24/7 access to this, depending on where you are. And we're also in a state where like, we have real-time access to like the atrocities of the world in our pocket. And so I think to just heap on top of that with our own imagination is like, to what end? I don't know. I think there's still something to be said for escapism for no other reason than that. But like, yeah, I feel like whether or not I continue to be interested in sort of quote unquote transgressive themes, I'm also looking for something else. And I think I've sort of hinted at that in the beginning and end of creation. Like, there is this longing for platonic friendship and love. And even in my own life, like looking at like the spiritual part of my life, probably for the first time ever in the past couple of years. But I find that actually quite rewarding. So I don't know. The more conversations I have with people who seem to be my peers, that does not seem to be that strange. And it's nice to hear even you speak about how you I don't know, what is the word you used exactly, but you're looking for something like tenderness or whatever.
Yeah.
I find that quite sweet. So, yeah.
Well, good. Yeah, I feel like the genuine is something that I'm chasing. I posted a meme in the group chat today that was the Buddha saying, "Do not kill the part of you that is cringe, kill the part of you that cringes." And I decided fairly recently, maybe right around the time I turned 30, that I was just like, I'm gonna just be a loser. Like, it's fine. I listen to horror punk more than any other genre of music. I'm the Halloween year-round guy. It's fine. I don't care if that's cool or fun or played out or kitschy or whatever. It's fine. I like lounge music. I think we need another 90s swing revival. And I can't dance, and I won't dance to it. And that's fine. And especially since becoming a father, which is so annoying to say, but like it's just kind of like redoubled that, because you think about, you know, the sort of desires you had as a kid that were preventable from being long-standing desires if adults in your life like understood, right? Where it's just like, right. Oh, you don't want to do this purely to spit in my eye. There's something to that, so I'm gonna let you do that. And like, my kid is not even 2 yet, but like, I'm trying to like hold on to certain childhood memories and feelings to like try to identify later when the kid is feeling those things to allow. But I don't know, that idea kind of like has opened up a lot of everything to me. And it kind of reminds me of like back when I was in college, getting really into Zen Buddhism for the first time, and then like meditating every day, sometimes twice a day, and being like really understanding about people.
Wow.
Like, it was just like, I went from being a really angry teenager to like, well, he's probably got his reasons for acting like that, to being like really angry in my 20s again. And now that I enter my 30s, I'm trying to like beat down that angry part and just be like, no, just wait a second. And I don't know, like, is nuance transgressive? The thing you said was not okay to say, but I totally understand why you feel that way. That cause, like, I can imagine how you got set up to acting that way. And like, let's work at the root cause for that. I don't know.
Well, you seem like a mature motherfucker, Joe. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think nuance probably is transgressive, at least in an online space, which is more and more the way we live.
Yeah.
So, no, kudos to you. Yeah, I didn't come to anything like meditation until very recently. And you know, I still am a judgmental asshole, especially inside my head a lot of the time. But I find, yeah, I don't know. At the end of the day, I'm not that complicated. I feel like if I pray or meditate every day, if I exercise, if I don't eat like garbage, if I do the best at my job and in my relationships, I feel better. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't think it's that hard to pin down. And yeah, you know, there are a lot of external things that can throw me for a loop, and other people too. So, yeah, I mean, look, I'm not a father. I've had moments where I thought that was going to happen, and I've had to think a lot about that the past several years. I don't think it's in the cards for me, at least in the near future. But I don't know. I respect the hell out of that. I think that's really cool that you're sort of processing that. Not like you and I know each other very well or at all, but I don't know. Just the fact that this kind of subject comes up in a discussion around indie lit, where I'm mostly writing about, you know, young hustlers getting murdered and being depressed and so forth, which has been my thought process for close to 20 years. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to come out the other end of that. And, you know, that said, I'm sure a lot of shit like that will continue to show up in my writing, but hopefully with some other things as well.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things I kind of noticed that was interesting was not only a repetition of themes, but like a repetition of specific images or specific situations. There's at least 2 like speculum scenes in the book. I guess it's like just kind of an overall trope in media of like the elderly, hyper rich gay man, which I was thinking about a little bit last night, trying to like really nail down what's going on there. Aside from the fact that like that's seems very likely to just be the case, that there's lots of closeted gay boomers who manage to make a lot of money. But like that's an interesting trope to me. And of course that recurred. Again, go ahead. I was trailing off.
I'm sorry to keep interrupting you. Fucking.
Please do. This is your show. I'm just on it.
Well, I deign to disagree, but also, I mean, part of that is just the fact that I interacted with a lot of older gay men, because as a, no longer a young man, but at one point a young man who I think at least had some attributes that people considered conventionally attractive some 15 years ago. It's not like there weren't women in my life, and I did a lot of straight porn. I'm mostly interested in women sexually, but men were the most forward with what they wanted and offering me money. And I don't know. I mean, even Luca talks about my book or my writing often as being like somewhat homophobic or something. And I'm not even going to argue with that necessarily, but it's like, I don't know. Just a lot of the conflict in my life, if I'm to look back on it, is like, I learned early on to use my body to get what I want. And that is also the main point of conflict probably for my entire sex work career. And in the several years after, where I was trying to get out of that, but still probably did a lot of that shit. Sorry, is that something? What's going on in this? I don't know.
Oh, that fire truck by my house.
Okay,
I live very close to a fire station, which is
no worries.
Great if my house ever catches on fire.
But all that's to say is like most of the autofiction stuff that talks about older men or my relationships with older men. I mean, they usually just start from a place of truth, and I often add these kind of fantastical, violent elements that come out the other end of that. And it's not like all these people were horrible to me. In fact, one of the men I bring up at least once or twice in there, I think in that second essay that I speak about Luca and writing The Magician and doing this sort of film and photographic elements of that. There was a guy, and I'm not going to say his real name because I actually feel kind of horrible at this point. It's not like he did anything explicitly bad. But it's just like this idea of like older, lonely men who, hire prostitutes, in this case me, and use them for kind of therapy more than anything else, probably. Because like the sex part, always my experience with like older Johns, it's like, it's actually pretty tame, but they're very, I mean, this is just like unloading all this emotional baggage on someone who's, in their like teens to say early 30s. That's probably the extent of anyone's real sex work career. But I didn't know how to handle that. And this man had kind of like tried to plan our lives out together after being seeing me for like a month or two, and freaked me the fuck out. And even though, he was in some ways very sweet, I think it's just like a completely had no self-awareness in regards to what this was. I mean, I was at least 20 years younger than him, taking his money to do this stuff. And I mean, I don't know what to say. This is, I guess, something that happens probably more frequently to women in the world. But I think a lot of the male sex workers I've spoken to, who I've been friends with for over a decade or so, have these like very intense issues around their own identity and how they're perceived in the world. And, I have a really close friend who is still a fairly popular male porn star. And it's like it's not like he can't be in a public space, but it just like he no longer puts himself out there in ways in which, you know, it's easy for people to identify him, because it's just it just produces this insane amount of like anxiety and overwhelm, and the way people address him and so forth. I don't know. I certainly felt that for a long time, and thank God, I think I've aged to the point where a lot of people just don't recognize me, or the porn cycle is so fucking like whatever now that I'm completely irrelevant. So like, great. Yeah.
Yeah. I found a lot of that really interesting from my perspective, where I guess I just had like the complete opposite experience. Like, I've only been with my wife. We started dating in high school, and we never stopped. And like, so like, but throughout that, like, I still had those sort of growing up ideas of like, and I was very I spent a lot of time online, a lot of time in my formative teens and 20s on Tumblr during like, you know, during the time that like social justice warrior was being thrown around as a pejorative. And like, the sort of things that were like being said about men, when maybe more accurately could have been said about patriarchy, and just things where it's like, it took so long for me not to like laugh when my partner refers to me as attractive, right? Or like scoff, where it's just like, I still don't know like what it means to be an attractive man. Like, I can't, when I look at an image of a man who's supposed to be attractive, I don't know if that's like, you know, if that's the male gaze saying this is a man, or if there's like a feminine gaze saying this is the man that we want. And there's like, of course, all conflicting, because neither end of the gender spectrum is a monolith anyway. So like, there was no clamoring for me growing up, right? Like, at any point. And so,
Well, look, I'm sure if you had been, well, I don't know. I can't say I'm sure if this situation had happened or not. You know, I think part of it is, I briefly went to school in Santa Cruz, and like UC Santa Cruz, and San Francisco, like near San Francisco. And at the time, that was like a hotbed of, you know, gay culture. And I think there were a variety of circumstances that I became aware of very early on in my life, that like men were sexually interested in me, and it was easier. I think I had a lot of shyness and whatever around my relationships to women, and it was not until I was in porn where people explicitly could say to me like, I want to fuck you, which was like, blew my mind at that age, that I had, you know, any awareness that women were attracted to me, but men were like, you know, I mean, I don't know if you've had this experience, but there's nothing like this in straight culture, where you go into a bar and someone will suck your dick in the first 15 minutes without knowing your name. But that was the case, at least in 2005 in San Francisco or something, right? I think, you know, there's a lot of cultural things that have happened since then, so maybe it's not quite going to happen like that. But, you know, to your point around all the rest of this stuff, I mean, I don't know if I want to get that into it. I don't know. I mean, I'm politically and ideologically pretty like centrist at this point in my life, because I think, you know, a lot of those conversations over the past, say, decade, I think this has been the most volatile, at least in an online space, and probably just culturally in general in the United States. To me, this is all about like a power struggle wherein, historically disenfranchised people are trying to find their place in the world. And there are movements that have allowed people to kind of like get more resources. But at the end of the day, I don't believe your genitals or the colors of your skin is going to make you inherently better or worse than anyone else. And I think we're finding that to be the case right now. But I also believe that we should all have as a representative amount of people in the population in all sorts of positions of power. So at the end of the day, maybe it's good, but I kind of have a tremendous amount of empathy for young men right now, because I think a lot of the backlash over the past however many years, like just what you were speaking of, like people just shitting on guys and I'm not even trying to do the like not all men hashtag thing here, but sort of too. It's just like fucking like everyone is as good or bad as everyone else if you're put in a position where you can be a piece of shit. You know what I mean? It's like I don't know what to say. And I think but the allowance of women now to sort of have a sexual voice in the culture and be just as vulgar and explicit and whatever about how they view male bodies. I mean, ultimately, maybe that's good, and I'm hoping this at some point just evens out so that there's a kind of, like, we're not talking about the female gaze or the male gaze. I mean, I think people like attractive bodies. I mean, I'm at this point in my life, getting back into fitness in a pretty serious way, and I'm almost 40, and I kind of do think men should be held to a higher standard than they have been in the past. And this is totally getting off track of our conversation, but like, fuck it. Like, I don't know. You look like a fit guy. You've got a kid. You're meditating. You're taking care of yourself. That's great. I don't know. And, yeah, I don't know. In terms of old gay men in my books, they were there. They were the ones giving me money. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's fucking...
Yeah, like, I guess I think a lot of this is sort of me putting what's on my mind kind of against what's in the book. And so a lot of times lately especially I'll read a book and just sort of like really measure what's going on with and to the guys in it, and just try to like fit that into my brain, right? Like one of the things that I saw in a YouTube video essay that like really shattered things for me relatively recently was just the idea that like white and male is an intersection, right? If we're going to talk about intersectionality, that's an intersection of two things, right? Like that is not standard. That's not like, that's not, a blank slate upon which everything else should be based off of. Those are like two very significant types of experience that are layered on top of a segment of the population. And so I'm just like, again, kind of growing up and going to college and watching left-wing things on YouTube and being on Tumblr in 2013, where, people are like, we all, it's not just you who has all this internalness. It's everybody. And it's like, oh yeah, cool. Yeah. Everybody's got that. Everybody's different from me. And it's only taken until recently to be like, oh, and I am also different from everybody else. Which I think is an important thing, but like, yeah, I don't know. There's also, I guess it's really uninteresting at this point. Anything else that I'd want to say about that, to me, because it's
Whatever. I mean, it's like it's relevant. Like I mean, I sort of agree with you. I think these are conversations that are still a little bit tricky to have in public because of just the language of things. But yeah, I mean, you talk about maleness and whiteness as like a hegemony, and I guess depends where you are. And you know, I get all the complaints and everyone's whatever, and I don't know that I have the answers to any of this, and I'm certainly more than willing to lift other people up, but you know, I want a seat at the table too. That's a human nature. What are we gonna like?
Right. Yeah. You know, I, by the nature of where I'm employed, see a lot of talks about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion from like the corporate side of it, where it's like, okay, this is a thing we're doing. Like, this is a policy we're implementing. How do we, like, what is it for real? And also, how are we going to sell it to our employees and members of the board? Like, how do we describe what this is? And one of the things that comes up a lot is like, we're not taking people off of the table. We're making a bigger table.
Right.
And, you know, I don't know. That feels like corporate speak to me, to an extent. But like, yeah, you know, like one of the things my female friends said to me about Tumblr in 2013, 2014 was that like, this is, you know, the largest gathering of teenaged women on the internet ever for the first time. And so like, you know, this is Woodstock 99, but on the internet. This is a gathering, and everyone's really excited that we're all here together. And it's only just starting now for everyone to sort of be like, okay, what did we get right? What did we get wrong now that we're all older and calmer and don't want our little sisters to act like us and that sort of thing. And yeah, I don't know. With regard to like transgressive fiction and stuff, it's interesting to sort of place all of that in there, because I do want extreme art to exist, and I also want it to follow my politics, but I'm also very interested in compassion. So it's like I'm making things more difficult for when I want to write something that's horribly violent and mean. It's like, okay, is this just me engaging my shadow, or is there actually something here that, like, am I learning something? And is someone who's going to read this going to be able to learn something too? I wrote a book for National Novel Writing Month the year before last, where like during the entire third act, I was like, is this eco-fascism? Am I writing eco-fascism? Like,
are you writing eco-fascism?
I'm feeling a lot of a catharsis about this giant plant monster that is eradicating all human life on Earth. I'm feeling really good about this. This is the most electric the writing has been in the book, and I'm going to have to go back and edit the first two acts based on like the electricity that is here, the life and vibrancy and energy that is like in the sentence structure and everything that's happening here. But I also don't want this to be so exciting that people come away from the book thinking I'm some sort of like anarcho-nihilist, eco-fascist, kill all humans to save the planet sort of guy, because I'm really not. Like,
I don't think. Look, I realize that we've been in a culture, especially maybe like post-Trump, where a lot of like there's so much stuff around like, you know, your artistic output having like 100% correlation to you as a human being. I find a lot of people really resisting that. Sorry, I'm getting text messages on my computer. I don't know how to turn this off, but I mean, I think that is just like some bullshit straight up, especially when you're writing something like fiction, that you need to be conscious of your politics. I mean, especially in a first draft, I think there's something to be said where like you're going to release this to the world. If you're putting something that you know is going to offend people, I think you just need to look in the mirror and be willing to be like, is this something I stand by for whatever reason? Like, and that reason might just be like, I want to be an edgelord. And I just certainly know a lot of older generations of people who feel so strongly that like their ability to have free speech is like outweighs anything else. And I kind of like get that point of view, and I'm not really going to fight them on that. But again, like, to what end? I certainly don't feel like my books, especially like Creation, has a certain moral framework. And I kind of like that. I like to play outside the frame of like my moral vision of the world, which does shift here and there, but I have a pretty like, I think, traditional view of what is right and wrong at this point in my life. And I don't think that my writing needs to like depict me as something that is like virtuous or whatever, that I need to engage with the world in that way. And, you know, working with Philip at Amphetamine Sulfate, I know he would say to me, because he has in the past, that like, you can't consider the audience. And to some degree, I have a lot of respect for him and his willingness to just, you know, ride that same kind of transgressive wave that has kept him afloat his entire life. And, you know, it's portrayed him as a very controversial figure at some points, because, you know, all that like noise music shit in the 80s and 90s was very closely associated with like serial killer zines that often had like Nazi paraphernalia and shit inside of it. And I don't know that it was ever like necessarily like using that as a platform to promote fascism. I think it was more of like the same thing as like the Sex Pistols or whatever, like, you know, drawing fucking swastikas or whatever. But at the same time, like, right now, that is not interesting or provocative, other than in a way to just create real world violence. So you can cling to an idea of like, oh yes, I want to say whatever I want. And like, for sure, I'll still kind of like vouch for your ability to do that. But like, it's all, my feeling around it is at this point, like, who the fuck cares? Like, like, we have already seen the worst thing in the world. Like, if that's all that's standing behind your work is that it's just provocative, it's just kind of lazy. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not really mad about it. I just find it kind of lazy. So, but I also don't feel like the being so frightened that we can't release a monster novel where this may promote ecofascism. I mean, from one white man to the next, I say go for it. But who knows? You might get in trouble. I don't know who would be offended by that at this point. But yeah.
Well, certainly for me, it's less about getting in trouble, and I guess more about being misunderstood.
Okay.
Which I think might be a childhood thing. Like, I think that might be real deep seated, of like saying something and having somebody take it the exact opposite way. Even if there's no like repercussions on me, like doesn't feel good. That feels really bad. And like, yeah, I'm aware like 10 people are going to read whatever it is the next book that I put out. And like, that's kind of the nature of the beast of the world that we're in. And, you know, I think like some of the more violent aspects of transgression that I am still very interested in are the sort of like Clive Barker-esque, like finding pleasure in the pain sort of thing. Like, I kind of feel like being content in the world as it is a very transgressive thing. To be like, these are the things that are happening and they're all bad. And I don't know. Like, I feel like that's a fairly transgressive statement to sort of end with. I've read other things from like trans writers that are incredibly violent, that like I think part of the violence is depicting it in certain ways and having it represent certain things that are new, right? Like, so it's not necessarily the violence that's getting old, maybe, but maybe it's serial killers and that sort of thing. Like, I don't know. Again, going back to Exquisite Corpse, like I really feel like that was a book about AIDS more than a book about cannibal serial killers. Like the amount of screen time that was given to not the main character kind of illustrated for me that like we're getting the edgy teenagers in the door with this thing, and while they're here, we're going to make you experience this aspect of the world that maybe you're not seeing. And then, I don't know, in 2020, like, you know, it's good for someone who up until his mid-20s didn't even really know a whole lot of out gay people to be like, all right, yeah, no, like, it is good for you to beat me over the head with AIDS. Not literally, but you know what I mean? Like,
sure. And I think a lot of this just comes down to like the context of what your culture is and the greater culture at large. And I mean, there's some stuff like where I think, you know, even in my writing, like releasing creation into the world, I kind of don't believe that a lot of people outside of like an indie lit scene are going to read this, and most of them are probably going to be familiar with a lot of the writers that I look up to, have some context for like Dennis Cooper and you know, some of this stuff, whereas I think someone like my mother can read it and be much more shocked and have a really visceral emotional reaction because of relationship to me and so forth. But you know, even when you're talking about like books that were written in the midst of the AIDS crisis, and then I read sort of like contemporary literature by gay men who are either younger millennials or like Gen Z, and they talk about AIDS as like a disease for old faggots or whatever. And this is like, you know, they're all in PrEP, and this is like not really that relevant anymore to their lives. And you know, I think that's also kind of a fun thing to play with if that is your experience. But it's sort of like, you know, you're always going to play with fucking with someone, and if like maybe that's your elders or whatever. But I think if you already exist in kind of like counterculture and have enough people in that environment who understand what you're doing, or you want to provoke them to get into that, I mean, by all means, go for it. You know, I haven't read Exquisite Corpse. The only Poppy Z. Brite novel I've read, I think it's called, is it Dark Souls? It's something like, maybe that's the video game. Lost Souls?
Dark Souls is a video game, so okay. It could very well be Lost Souls.
I know, I could look it up.
That's funny. Exquisite Corpse is the only one I've read.
Right, Lost
you know.
Souls? Yeah, Lost Souls, Dark Souls is a game. All right, never mind. So anyway, this was like about vampires and stuff, but
oh, interesting. Yeah, kind of going back to where we were at the beginning with regard to transgressive themes or whatever. It's like you got to keep it moving, right? Like if you're going to transgress, if you're going to be in the avant-garde, like it can't necessarily be a persistent aesthetic, because then it isn't transgressive anymore, right?
You're absolutely. I think I 100% agree with that.
So like, yeah, like I kind of feel like the idea behind punk is kind of similar to that, where like punk now doesn't mean what it meant in the 80s. Punk now is a genre and an aesthetic and a thing on Pinterest,
Right.
And it's not, necessarily what it was. And that's not really even a value statement on my end, right? Like, I guess part of being at the avant-garde is that like the name changes too, of like who's actually in the mud, in the gutter, moving things around. Like, I don't know, noir is kind of similar to that too, where it's like now it's a costume and it's not an exploration of the seedy underbelly of American society or whatever. It's it's a playlist on YouTube to put on in the background while I clean.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of my feelings around this lately, as I sort of get older, is like I'm kind of fine not living with a need or desire to even have to be transgressive or fit within the avant-garde. I feel like at the beginning of my 30s, I had this very strong desire that I wanted to write this really mean, transgressive personal horror novel. And to some extent, I feel like I did that with the first half of The Magician. And it's literally the only book of mine that anyone has given a shit about. And I owe Philip Best at Amphetamine Sulfate a lot of gratitude for that. But, I am now 38. My focus in life is my marriage, my career, my friends, my spiritual life, and my art practice, which is writing. But like, I don't need to feel like I've done something that has like moved the needle on a cultural level or on a like edgelord level. Like that type of shit just doesn't get me going. So I think there are things to be said for like honing in my personal aesthetics or like the way I write in terms of prose, or like actually sort of having some evolution to like, even if I look at my style, it's like I've always loved this super minimalist, like Joan Didion / Brett Ellis / Dennis Cooper style of writing. And now I'm like really excited by these maximalists that I don't even feel like I can pull it off correctly. But reading that stuff gives me like a vision of like I can get better, or I can write a more like meaty poetic sentence or something. And it's not so cut down, even though I still have a hard time getting out of that trend. But it's like, it just gives me something to kind of go after in the future. And it often doesn't have as much to do with like the content of my books, even though I do need something that is emotionally or philosophically interesting to pursue. I think in the past, it's mostly just been like more or less like a wound that I'm trying to excavate in myself or get through or just figure something out. And I don't have as much of this like day-to-day depression or anxiety that's feeding my work. And I think when you speak about punk or youth subculture in general, most of what has always excited me about that stuff is more the energy rather than the formal elements. Because I think music is the perfect example of this. Like, it's really hard to become popular as like a 50-something-year-old musician. Like, a lot of what draws us to this is like the image, the energy, the sort of volatility around young people, and because they're at the peak of their lives where like everything is super important and they have a voice, and they're viewing the world differently than old fucks like myself, and that's to be true forever and ever and ever. And I want to keep a little bit of an eye on what younger people are doing, especially in literature, because that's always probably going to be the most interesting, at least from like an ideological perspective, and carry some weight in terms of just like what's happening in the world. Because I think by the time you're my age or certainly decades older, you just by default kind of out of touch with a lot of this shit. But I think there are always like mountains to climb, and I'm on the next one, so that's fine with me. And I'm curious what you're putting out. I mean, you're close to a decade younger than me. I haven't read your stuff, but I'd like to. I don't know what you're putting out. If you're interested in eco-terrorism. It sounds like not legitimately, but
no.
Fascism. I don't know. I've heard that term before, but that means it goes to show how fucking old I am.
Well, and probably how little of a threat it actually is. I don't know. My interest in putting work out has sort of waxed and waned since I put out my first novel in like 2021, I think, Tired. And I really enjoyed writing that. I really enjoyed having, the first handful of people who I got on the podcast to like read it. Like I've talked before about how I was trying like really naively to be like, this is a book that's going to be like not fun to read. And I was like, obviously even more poorly read than I am now. And it's just like, yeah, having two characters who talk without quotation marks and whose dialogue is never attributed to either of them is like not the most experimental antagonistic thing you can do to the audience. But I still have a real soft spot for that book. But since then, like I've been writing a lot of first drafts. Longtime listeners of the show will know I have a hard time editing. As my interest in having people read my work waxes and wanes with my mental health, and the reasons for both kind of shift along with the mental health as well. I think the first time I had Snatch Wilden or William Cody Watson on to talk about maybe it was Slasher Redux or Paradise Redux, one of those self-published books. I was kind of talking about my lack of interest in submitting, particularly as someone for whom really the only places I'm super interested in submitting are places where half of the roster has been on my podcast. Like, it just doesn't feel good to me, because like, if they say yes, am I going to really ever believe that they wanted to say yes, or did they just want the Writing the Rapids guy to have a book on their roster? And if they say no, are they going to feel particularly bad about saying no? Are they going to worry about, our professional relationship? And I don't like it. Like, it's all built up inside of me. So part of me was like, okay, well, maybe I'll self-publish, but I never got around to it. Some of my friends and I are thinking about maybe putting something together for us that would operate kind of as like a anarcho syndicate, where like it's the group of us and we're all working on our own stuff but helping each other with each other's stuff, and largely putting that out and then grabbing people who we think need a place, who might have a hard time finding a place. I mean, all of my favorite presses, like Inside the Castle, started with somebody who couldn't get their book published. So he said, I'm going to start a press and find other people who write like me, because they're going to have a hard time getting published too. So I'm kind of in that position, but I also don't really want to start a press. So the short answer to that very long thing is like, really the only people who are reading anything I write are like personal friends of mine and people who show up to the poetry open mics I go to. And like, I'm very content with that.
Well, are you writing stuff that would find a home, you think, at least in theory, with Inside the Castle?
I think so, yeah. I mean, okay. I wrote a book specifically to send to Inside the Castle and sent it to him, and I got a very nice rejection.
Well, and that's not the worst thing in the world, though.
And it's great, right? Like, one of the things I've said to my friends is like, I thought starting a podcast would make it easier to get published, but it just makes it so that the rejections are nicer. And like, that's great. Like, I really do enjoy the personalized, like, hey man, really appreciate everything you do. This book is really great. I really enjoyed reading it. It's just, I just don't think that it fits with us.
Fair enough.
Which is fine. And, you know, it's, the people who work almost entirely by themselves to put out some of the greatest books of our time, in my opinion, deserve nothing but grace. But yeah, like, I write all the time and I share my work with my friends and my wife, and they tell me what they think about it. And I still am my favorite writer. So like, I largely write for the pleasure of being able to read what I write. And sometime eventually I will put out the books that are sitting in my Google Drive, and then I finally will have more than one book out.
Well, I have no real advice other than, like, I don't know. From my fucking personal vantage point, I do think there is some value in not self-publishing, even if it's when you're doing, even if it turns out to be something like you and your friends start your own press to publish your own work. I feel like that's more valuable. There's just, it's so hard to get anyone to give a shit. And not like that's even the point of doing this. Like, look, I don't make fucking money from writing books. I made $0 on my entire 3 print runs of The Magician. There's no money. It's just not there. But having someone other than yourself that's also going to say, like, I'm invested in this, at least to the bare bones minimal thing, that we're doing this as a project to give you some basic feedback that, like, this could be better. Because, like, you know, we're all writing this is like such a solitary fucking thing. And I think even if you just share this with your friends, like, none of your friends are honest with you ever. I think having someone that's like, I don't know, it's like, Philip Best is an asshole, but he's like a sweetheart at the same time. And if I did something that sucks, he'll tell me. And, you know, Ben is not an asshole at Apocalypse Party, but he's also line editing The Magician. And I'm happy we have a second chance of this, because there's a lot of fucking sloppy bullshit in there. And honestly, I'm glad you didn't read that PDF I sent you. You should wait till the end of the year, because it's going to be a little bit better. But there's just, I think with whatever you're doing, something nice to have this, like, be a little like a communal project, even if it's a community of 2, you know, that's slightly better. And take that for what you will. I mean, look, at the end of the day, if, like, no one wants to do this, you might as well just go after it, because, like, there's been plenty of people who self-publish and actually get some traction, or even they don't, but there's something valuable in just having it out in the world. But I think, like, the fact that we're in an online culture now where there are fewer and fewer obvious gatekeepers, but there are still so many for anything that's going to, like, change your life in any meaningful way, right? But I feel like for me to pick up a book, I would like to have someone beyond the writer say also, this is worth it. Because otherwise, like, you know, we have 100,000 songs come out every day. God knows how many books. And most people who read indie literature are other writers, and it's nice just to have the baseline, like, 2 to 5 other people that got your back. And I think when you're I feel a little bit like on a small press, even though no one really gives a fuck, and this doesn't make any fucking money, you know, it's like being on, like, an art football team or something, which is cool. Just like, you get to meet a few interesting people. And I feel like that has a little bit of value. And, you know, we get to talk to each other on podcasts like these and stuff. And again, I'm sure you realize how few people listen to indie literature podcasts, but it's like nice to have anyone like just have a dialogue in a culture where like this rarely happens anymore.